Hi, I'm John Abbott, the producer and editor of A Oral History of Chalfont. Episode number 7, The Toll of War, is a somber episode in our series since it shares the impact of war to the families of some of our borough veterans.
There was land up north of Chalfont that belonged to the borough, and they called it a park at that time. And they gave the vets permission to build a building there. And in 1976, they, in celebration of the bicentennial of the borough, they put a monument there, which is for all the people that served during the wars, and to honor all of them. And they also had 7 trees there, which were put in memory of the people that had not come home.
You asked me to tell some stories about war and the effect of war on people. And war takes a terrific toll on people that, we don't, as a citizen, we don't realize how it is. It's a lasting toll. It changes lives forever. And so I'd like to tell you both my father and my brother were involved in 2 different wars. And I'd like to tell you the story about both of them. I don't know a lot about my father, but he was in the First World War, and I think it was shortly after his 18th birthday that he and a friend enlisted in the war, and he was drafted into the infantry, or not drafted, he enlisted into the infantry, and he was in the 79th Division. He was very proud of that, and he was sent over to Europe, and how in the world they ever dug the trenches, I'll never know. But they didn't have backhoes in those days, so I have to assume it was pick and shovel that they dug the trenches, and then the living in them was in all kinds of weather, soggy, soaking wet, cold. It was brutal living. But I do remember one time he told me that they had been on an exhausting march, had marched all day and a couple of days, and they were really tired. They came to this farm, and they decided to spend the night on the farmland, and he chose a pile of what he thought was hay to sleep on. He said he laid down and fell fast asleep. when he woke up in the morning, I guess to the roosters crowing, but anyhow, when he woke up, he found out it was a pile of stone instead of hay. I mean, that's how exhausted he was. He was gassed. During the First World War, the Germans used gas warfare, and it was cheaper than bullets. It could take out a lot of men. So my father, he brought his army uniform and equipment home, and he had a gas mask included with his equipment, and he had written on it, my buddy. But apparently he didn't get his buddy on in time when there was a gas warning, and he was gassed. It affected his lungs. He was in a hospital in Germany, or in Europe, for quite a while. And actually, when he was able to be a little mobile and up and about, he asked for something to do, and they found out he had worked for a butcher and knew how to cut meat. So he was in the hospital cutting the meat for the cook every day. But they did have to collapse one of his lungs, and that affected him the rest of his life. When he came home and was discharged from the army, the doctor that discharged him said to him, "Oh, you'll probably only live about 7 years." And my father got a great deal of pleasure telling people that, "I read that doctor's obituary in the paper." So he outlived the doctor. And anyhow, the B-17s came into the European theater. Now, the B-17 was called the Flying Fortress, but the men who flew them called it the Flying Coffin. It did not have a good record of safety and return. The losses were very, very high. When they first started to fly in Europe, they did not have a fighter escort, and the average number of missions that the plane could make, that the average number that the planes flew a mission was 8. And I just cannot imagine the crew getting onto that plane wondering if this was their 8th mission or not. It just did not have a good record. But the government finally got fighter escorts over there, and then the average went up to 18. And that's when they turned the average age, or the number of missions, that if they completed 25, they were then returned to the United States. And so my brother's plane was shot down, and it was either the 22nd or the 23rd mission. They had completed a bombing raid over Germany, and the tail gunner saw the first 2 bursts go off at their altitude. He knew that the ground had their range, and he tried to warn, as soon as he saw the first one, to warn the captain, but they burst come so fast that the 3rd one hit the plane, and the plane actually broke in 2. The tail was ripped off, and during that explosion, the Smithy was the tail gunner, and his he was not injured severely, but his parachute was shredded, so he couldn't bail out. So he had to ride the tail section of the plane down to the ground. Now they fly, I don't know what the exact altitude was, but they fly it, we're flying at usually flying at 10,000 feet. And at that level, since it was not a pressurized plane, they had to wear air oxygen masks, take oxygen. And so he had to ride the plane down. He braced himself, and it just sort of swirled down in a big circle until it crashed. And in the crash, that's when he really was beat up. He had broken bones, both legs were broken, and he was in pretty bad shape.
So he's the one who survived.
He's the one that survived, yes. All of the others were killed. Anyhow, Smitty laid there on the ground, unable to move, get himself up, and it took quite a while before the Germans or whomever arrived, and night was approaching. He was on a farm. The debris of the plane landed on a farm, and they literally grabbed him and drug him up to the barn and left him in the barn overnight. The farmer's wife, feeling sorry for him, I guess, snuck out after dark and brought him a piece of cake and a glass of water, both of which he could not move to eat or get a hold of. But he said that the best thing that it did for him, the cake kept the rats off of him during the night. I should mention that I know this because when he did come back to the United States, he was in Atlantic City on R&R, and my sister-in-law went down and picked him up, and we had him at our house for dinner. So he told us these stories, and it wasn't until late October, early November, that the Army, the government, left her know that he was missing in action. That was all we had gotten. And the notifications were delivered by Western Union and in telegraph. And so what they had to do is they had to deliver these in hand to the person they were addressed to. I don't know exactly where or when she received the notice of he was missing in action, but then, as I recall, it was Christmas week, between Christmas and New Year's, that she was working in Lansdale. She was a beautician, and she was working at a beauty parlor in Lansdale, and the telegram came to her home, and her father went with the telegraph, the driver from Western Union with the telegram, to the beauty parlor because he would not leave it without with the parents. He had to deliver it to my brother's wife. So it was in the afternoon, and she was working at the beauty parlor when she got the notification. And you can imagine how hard that was. This is the type of things that even the civilians went through during the war. It did affect everybody, not just those on the battlefield. We had the choice of bringing my brother's body home, leaving him buried in a military cemetery in Europe. Now, one of the fellas in the crew, parents, immediately when they could after the war, travel over there and visited the cemetery. It's in St. Avold, France, which is in the southern part of France. And all of the crew members were buried side by side in a row. So when they got home, they sent all of the crew, parents, wives, etc., pictures of the cemetery, and then they suggested that all of the people all of the families do the same thing, that they either leave them there buried side by side, or we all bring them home for individual burials in family lots. And so the decision was that leave them there to rest in peace side by side as comrades. So that was the plan, but I have visited this cemetery on one of my trips to Europe, and the government, with better thoughts than what individuals have, they relocated the bodies, and they are not buried side by side. I really don't know where the others are, but I did visit my brother's grave, and the cemetery is beautiful. It's well kept, but it is massive, and it's only one. I mean, just to stand, there was a hillside, a slight hill crest, and you could go up on it and view down the slope and across the plain there, all of the graves, and it is heartbreaking. The Second World War has been the most deadly war for American soldiers of any of the conflicts that we have been in. I don't know the exact number, but I believe in my memory that it was over 600,000 American soldiers that were killed during the war. And that's all that I have to say, although I would like to point out that in Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, includes a chapter on a resident of Chalfont, Wesley Coe, and he was in the Air Corps too. He was in one of the glider troops, and went into Normandy Beach on the day after D-Day, and he fought all through France and to the whole war. It was in the Battle of the Bulge.
My brother Harry grew up in Chalfont, and he was working at Brewster, which was a defense contractor making airplanes. He was 26 years old and married and had a little girl. May 4th of 1944, he was drafted into the Army. He was sent to Fort McClellan, Alabama for basic training, and after his training in November 4th of 44, he went on the Queen Mary out of New York to France. It took 2 weeks for the Queen Mary to get to France because they were zigzagging across the Atlantic. When he got to France, he was sent to the Hurricane Forest, and on November 29th, he was killed along with quite a number of other American soldiers. He was at the Battle of the Bulge in Hurricane Forest. As I said, he was buried in a Belgian cemetery along with other American servicemen. When he was killed, the Army sent a serviceman to my mother to notify her that of my brother's death. All of the family, my 4 sisters and father, we were all working, but my mother called us all home, and it was one of the saddest days of my life when we were told what had happened. On VE Day, when we were all outside celebrating, and Mrs. Hartzell, who was a neighbor across the street, said it was bittersweet for our family to celebrate the end of the war, but losing my brother, and not only my brother, but my father's sister's son was also killed in World War II. They were the only 2 males in the Abraham Swartley family, and they were both killed in World War II. Well, it was a very difficult time. I know that it affected my father, and I don't think he ever really recovered from the death of his son.
I graduated from Central Bucks West, back then it was just Central Bucks, in 1968. I worked for a year, and then I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and went in November of 1969. Well, I enlisted because I felt I had an obligation to my country, and that's the way I was raised, and it was the old adage that Kennedy used, ask not what your country, can do for you, but so, and my father being a World War II vet, and I just felt that it was an obligation as a citizen. They were going to send me to Anglico, which I was told would be around the Saigon area, but then they changed my orders at the last minute and sent me to Da Nang to 1st Recon. And as a field radio operator, they needed radio operators because of the people getting, discharged. That's the way it was put. So I became a field radio operator on a radio relay that kept track of the teams inserted in the area around my relay. And I would call into the rear base from my relay to tell them what the conditions were with the teams in the field. Then I'm on the radio talking to the resupply bird coming up the side of the mountain. That's the one photo of me with the radio. And the other one is me sitting there I was off duty at the time, so I'm just sitting there taking pot shots at the Rock Ape Center at the perimeter trying to eat the remaining foods in the sea rat cans.
So those are rock monkeys?
Yeah, they call them rock apes.
Rock apes.
Yeah, and they can get pretty nasty. So,
And you have a story of about a rock ape?
well, the story is that the team was out and they did their bivouac underneath a big tree, and they had some protection from the weather. And as they were sleeping, a rock ape, which they are very territorial, came down the tree. Didn't like that they were bivouacking in his area, so the monkey proceeded to beat the living hell out of this guy, and they ended up having to extract him to the hospital.
And then you had another story about a centipede. You want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, that's just another part of the jungle that in the relay, in my bunker in the relay, you sleep with your clothes on, and you hang your jacket up on the wall. And so I went and got my jacket because it was chilly outside, and as I put my arm in the sleeve, I felt something crawling up my arm. So here I took my arm out, shook it vigorously, and this centipede that was about a foot long, about an inch wide, fell out, and I quickly chopped it up with my K-bar, and luckily for me it didn't bite, because a guy had a staff sergeant there that showed me the bite that he got, and he was laid in the hospital for 3 days because of the poison that the centipedes carry. So I got lucky, but that's part of it. It's an everyday of something going on. We had rats on the mountains because of the sea rat cans being thrown over the side of the hill. We were overrun with rats, so we were setting traps, and first day we got 76 rats, the next day we got like 65 rats, and the next day we got like 50 rats. So we were eventually whittling down the rat population. But that's what happens when you throw food over the side of the mountain.
So living fighting in a war is a little bit different than living in Chalfont.
Yeah, it was definitely an eye opener in more than one way. The sacrifice you made is because it's a way of life. So you live your way of life. You sleep with your clothes on, you're always on high alert, and you just never have a sense of security. So that's why there's a lot of PTSD. I mean, you just never knew when something was going to hit the fan.
So war.
Well, Camp Reasoners basically is the home of all the recon teams. And so basically we had an EM club there, that's the enlisted club, and a couple other places, laundry, they had.
So it's kind of like base camp then.
Yeah, basically. It was a crude kind of base camp. And we had the Freedom Hill Exchange down the road. You could go down there, you could buy your cigarettes and your TVs and radios and whatever else, clothes, whatever else you wanted to buy. So, yeah, it was, where we got taken out of. When we go home from there, that was the last area to be.
And how would they extract you from the mountain?
Well, on a good extraction, you just come in, they land the helicopter on the landing zone, and you hop in the helicopter and you take off. But if you're in the jungle and you're in a hot LZ or you're having trouble, they would use a spy rig, and they would drop a line down from the helicopter with carabiners on it, hookups. You'd have a harness on you, and then you'd hook onto this spy rig, and then you get like 6 people on the rig, and they lift you up, hopefully high enough that you'd miss the trees as they're moving, and get you out of harm's way.
And did that ever happen to you, or?
No, fortunately, I never had to use that. The one photo is me inside the X-ray relay, which is an actual pretty fortified bunker. And the other one is my second relay, which is just a piece of corrugated steel, like a drainage pipe cut in half, and put sandbags over top of it. And that was my second home. So there wasn't much, your living conditions were minimal. On the second relay, because of the nature of the war at the time, we were standing down, so they put the Army, Navy, and Marines on the same hill, and we had a patrol out on Charlie Ridge, and they ambushed a couple VC, and they were moving on to check out the area, and then the VC counter ambushed, and they shot the Sergeant Bingenheimer, and he got shot through the liver, and he bled out, and so because it was the monsoons, they couldn't extract him, so they kept an artillery barrage around their perimeter throughout the night. And at first light, they had a helicopter hovering outside of their area of operation. And as one would run out of fuel, another one would come and take its place until they got a window of opportunity in the clouds. And then they would move in, and they spy rigged them out. And Mr. Bingenheimer was the last one attached to the spy rig, and they extracted them all. This is much later, years later, that they found out that Charlie Ridge was totally carved up with tunnels, little hospitals, and all kinds of stuff inside that mountain. So that recon team would have never made a dent in anything.
And another one of the tragic things of war, but there was a couple that was with, in the, I don't know what, the squadrons or the group, bomber group or whatever it was, and they were going from Tucson to California on a troop train, and this couple had a young baby, and when they had to leave, apparently the baby took sick, and it was sick on the train, and it was crying, and they couldn't get any attention, and the baby died before they got to California. So, you know, there are all kinds of stories like that of the human suffering. But he did tell us that they had to clean up a concentration camp or two, and he said it was just horrible. One of the things that he said is he unnailed a skeleton off of a wall in a concentration camp. What humans can do to other humans is almost unbelievable, and particularly in situations like war and what they were going through in Germany with the trying to annihilate the Jewish people. It's just, I cannot believe human beings being so cruel. I do remember when we got the telephone call from my sister-in-law's father about my brother being missing in action that night. It so happened that I was a member of the Luther League, St. James Church there in Chalfont. It was a small group, but we would meet, instead of at the church, we would meet in people's homes. So I was having a Luther League meeting when my father got the telephone call. And I remember he was very upset. We had a door from the dining room into the kitchen, and they closed that door, and I understand my father was just broke down and was really in bad shape. He read the writing on the wall, so to speak, that this meant that my brother was dead, you know. And it was trying to keep a stiff smile and face during the meeting, and you know, I didn't know it till afterwards, so that, you know, the kids and the advisors that were with us didn't know that the family had gotten bad news. And I think people that lived through this Second World War and the Korean War and the Vietnam, they've experienced all those horrors of war, but they come out a stronger individual, knowing that they can survive and humanity can survive. And my story is that war is hell.
My husband, Edward, went to Lansdale High School, and when he was a senior, he enlisted in the Army and served 5 years, most of them in the South Pacific. So when he came home from the service, well, years later, Lansdale High School became North Penn High School, and they decided to give diplomas to the men and women who enlisted in the service and never graduated. So there was a graduation ceremony, and my husband was 79 and received his high school diploma at that time.
No, I mean, for me, going in, it was 69, so I had an idea that there was some protesting going on, but, you know, you don't, when you get in the service like that, you're totally disconnected from civilian life, and you don't hear a lot of the stuff that's going on in the streets, and apparently it got a lot worse by the time I got discharged and whatever, that they just had no tolerance whatsoever. I was treated like most everybody else. I was called names. I was avoided. You tried to get out of your military clothes, but being in the Marine Corps, you can't hide a high and tight when everybody else had hair down at their shoulders. So, you know, they knew you were military. So you just, you know, went with the flow and tried to avoid people. And you just didn't talk about it. And like, the one thing I like to stress is that these protesters, they got thoroughly confused between the war and the warrior. The warriors were doing their job as the government asked, and these protesters picked on the warriors, which shouldn't have been picked on. That's my absolute feeling, and I feel that way to the day I die. You know, with all that going on around me, I still felt obligated to go into the service and do my part. So maybe I'm a diehard conservative or whatever, however you want to look at it, but I still feel this is the best country in the world.